he's taking these shots, this antagonism, this taunting to the intelligence community.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. So even for a practical, supposedly hard-nosed businessman, he's being really dumb to do this.
What are they going to do to us, Chuck? What
are the 6 ways from Sunday you're talking about? I'm a little...
It almost seems as though that the president wasn't in charge of the executive branch. That would be a problem. That means we're being run by something else. Right? I mean,
yes.
Isn't that what he's implying?
Welcome back to the show. We have got another really interesting week of news for you, starting with Trump indictment number 3. If you're still counting, we're at number 3. Also, Hunter Biden's former business associate, Devon Archer, has appeared in front of Congress this week and did an interview with Tucker Carlson, and he revealed a ton of damning evidence against the Biden family and their dealings with Ukraine and elsewhere. And finally, we're going to talk about an American-born journalist who's dual citizen with Chile, residing in Ukraine. He detailed this really epic story of torture and imprisonment in Ukraine all over some YouTube videos that he posted. He was trying to escape the country, and it's been a very, very interesting story. We're going to dig into that as well. Joining me to talk about those things, the usual suspect, David Rand. How are you, sir?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm great. It doesn't seem like you're doing perfectly great, though.
I can't lift my arm above here. That's about it. That's all the motion I got.
For those of you just listening, David is in a shoulder sling. So we discussed a few episodes ago with Adam Thuen that he injured you rolling jiu-jitsu, correct?
Yep.
And so you just had that operated on?
Yeah, I got a platelet-rich therapy in the shoulder, which basically they take out your blood, they distill it down in a centrifuge, and they inject it back in. And then that causes the immune system to go in and repair the tissue. Otherwise, it would take like a year and a half to get like 60% of use back. This way, hopefully it takes about 3 or 4 months, and I'll get 80 to 100% of use back.
Okay, so it's different than adrenochrome.
Yeah.
You haven't tried that yet, have you?
Yeah.
That's the next step.
No, not adrenochrome. I wouldn't have these bags under my eyes. I wouldn't be all tired all the time.
Well, yeah, we'll work on that next. Okay, one thing at a time. Kyle Mack, how are you, sir?
Doing great.
Awesome.
Looking forward to this episode.
Absolutely. Well, let's dig right into it. Trump indictment number 3. Let's recount them. What was number 1?
Number 1 was Stormy Daniels and the potentially using campaign funds to pay off someone after a hush money for a sexual scandal.
Right. And then number 2 was the documents at Mar-a-Lago that were, classified documents he took from the White House during his presidency, that there was the kerfuffle with the FBI raiding his home in Florida.
And if you remember our coverage of that back then, it had to do with whether or not the Espionage Act applied to this or whether or not the Presidential Records Act applied to this. So the Presidential Record Act pretty much says presidents have a different standard when it comes to classified evidence after they're no longer president.
And just a note of clarity on those first 2. Are those still happening?
Yeah. There's a great New York Times, I think, like countdown to each one because they each have different court dates.
Oh, sure.
And obviously the one we're going to talk about today is the furthest behind in those because it was just filed.
Last week.
Just this week.
So what do they got him on now?
So it's the accusation is 4 different counts. 1, conspiracy to defraud the United States. 2, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. 3, obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding. And 4, conspiracy against voting rights.
And this all stems from the activities on January 6th and his speech that occurred adjacent to what happened at the Capitol.
People have been saying that. I don't think that's exactly right. I think it's January 6th as condensed down from the period of the election to January 6th and the various speech, legal argumentation, and tweeting that happened in that time frame. So here's a good example. So the summary, like the quickest, tightest way I could think is that the claims he made about fraud in 2020, in the 2020 elections, were knowingly false, and that by conspiring with his lawyers, who in this case are co-conspirators, because that's what's interesting here, his co-conspirators are all his lawyers, it was a conspiracy to unlawfully obstruct the ceremonial confirmation of the election and thereby overturn the election. Right. And so that's what's interesting here is, the thing actually says itself that he has the right to free speech. He has the right even to say untrue things, even knowingly true things. So things he knows are false. So That's an interesting little detail there. And second, that he's entitled to formally challenge the results of the election.
This is all listed in the indictment?
Yeah. So the indictment has like an upfront what we're not doing section. And that's one of the things I've gotten kind of confused by the coverage I've seen on Twitter is it's like, well, this just violates the First Amendment and this is what they're saying. And they obviously didn't consider that. No, they do consider that upfront and they say this is that. They say that he has the right to formally challenge through the court process these various different things. So... I read as much of it as I could in the time frame I had. I've been a little bit high on pain medication, so I couldn't remember it all very well. But the indictment it seems to be arguing that it implies that the legal advice that he got from his lawyers was somehow a conspiracy to overthrow the United States and to deny voting rights. That's like a quick
because they were telling him this is a potential route that's never been done before, but theoretically it works. Right?
Yeah. So let's review what at least one of the things was. So okay, one of the things I'm seeing on Twitter is that there was a bunch of stuff that where like Trump called like AGs and like threatened them to get fired unless they overthrow the election and stuff like that. Those are accusations being made. That doesn't seem to be what's in here though, from what I saw. It seems like this mostly has to do with, okay, here's the timeline. I'll go through the timeline. November 2020. Trump and lawyers, they say that the VP has the ceremonial role in the Senate to authenticate the election after all the results are in. That they can deny the election authenticity because there are existing lawsuits that had been fired by the Trump campaign, right? So remember, this is January, and the election was 2 months beforehand. The DC and media establishment all say that's idiotic, right? It's never been done before, and it's a misinterpretation of the code. The lawyers say, well, it's vague, so why not try, right? And so they try to persuade the VP at the time,
Mike Pence.
Mike Pence. I was just going to say Indiana governor. I can't remember. I might still have a little pain reliever.
Forgettable Mike, as he's known.
Jan 6th happens, right? Which is supposed to be the day where this is supposed to happen. Idiots run around the Capitol. Violence occurs. Terrible day for the U.S., of course. Nothing is interrupted to the degree that the authentication election doesn't happen, right? And so that's really the interesting part of this is 3 years later now, we have this lawsuit that says if they had persuaded Pence, could he have, that would have overthrown the government of the United States.
So had something happened that didn't actually happen, it would have meant that Trump could have overthrown the US.
Because otherwise, why is it a conspiracy? Right? If you ask someone to do something that is just a ceremonial position, how can that be a conspiracy? Is it just the intent to object to an election? Is that illegal? That can't be illegal because they say that he has both a free speech right and a process right to do so. So if it's just the intent, how can you make the argument that it's that he's not exercising that right if it's legal, or if it's illegal, then he's not doing anything? If he's just,
well, and furthermore, I mean, and you mentioned this now 3 times, it's ceremonial.
Right.
It's not actually the legal process of certifying the election that the Senate was doing on January 6th. It was just, it's a ceremony. It's symbolic, right? And that's a key term. Like by interrupting that, it doesn't actually stop the election from being certified.
This is what is so curious about it, because you have people who are saying January 6th would have overthrown the government, right? And you're like, really? That doesn't seem likely.
It's that easy, though, too.
I mean, and then you have them simultaneously saying that that was like this huge threat and this hugely serious thing, while at the same time basically saying that it simultaneously was already set in stone. It was already done. It was already locked in. So which is it? I mean, was it this huge threat? And how is that true? How could that possibly be true? Like if Q, there's a great tweet by Michael Tracy. And it's like, if the Q shaman had just, yodeled one more stanza in the House of Representatives and the whole government would have collapsed, right? That's not how it works. I'm pretty certain that a coup couldn't be performed without guns, right? And just, especially when the Capitol Police, we're so facilitating of the whole thing in so many dimensions, not every dimension, real violence happened. Oh yeah. But with this strangely confusing thing. Yeah. So he tried to overthrow the government through violence. You're talking about Trump. I know. Thank God he failed. If that shirtless shaman had been able to yodel in the Senate chamber for just 2 minutes longer, the most powerful government in world history would have literally been overthrown. I still lie awake at night shivering about it. But that's the crazy thing. I just don't. It's strange because over 1,000 people have been charged in relation to January 6th. Most of them were nonviolent. Most of them never even went to the Capitol. The Q shaman guy, the shirtless dude in the tweet, he's getting 4 years in prison. So it's insane that, so like that is in contrast with this whole thing. Like those people did do something that was pretty clearly illegal, right? You can't go onto the grounds unless you're invited, right? Not the people who just went to a protest though, right? There's like an over prosecutorial like fervor going on that's going way beyond any sensibility or rights. And maybe Trump is just getting wrapped into that. Maybe this is political. I mean, one thing that we do know for certain is that if I'm this confused at what the heck the basis of this lawsuit is at this point, maybe don't do it. Right?
Like, it may be lacking some things.
Yeah, like if you're going to prosecute the existing 2020 election frontrunner against the current government, unless you want to be a banana republic, maybe don't bring a lawsuit unless it's very straightforward and very clearly violating the law, where you got some solid evidence. And maybe they do. There's still a lot of stuff that still hasn't come out. There's still a lot of findings still to be happened. Maybe it still works. I don't know. I am very skeptical that this isn't politically motivated, if only because I'm, obviously very jaded on politics.
Well, obviously it's politically motivated.
Yeah, right.
Like that's a big theme of our show, is that all this is just, all these are just mafias vying for power right now. It's like, of course it's politically motivated. They're trying to eliminate the guy that was kind of standing in the way of what they were doing. And he was kind of, blocking them off of, whatever their plans are. Like, obviously is like it doesn't take like a rocket scientist to figure this out. Right?
Yeah, I'm only trying to give them the best possible interpretation, steel man their position, that they're just like, well, we got to enforce the law, and this was an attempt to overthrow the government. Okay, so a couple analysis components of that. Yes, Kyle's right. We should be absolutely skeptical about whether or not prosecution of any former, or existing political power challenging the existing people in power shouldn't be with an extra dose of skepticism. That's why it should be a very high standard for this situation. Second, note how much faster the government is to protect itself than it was to protect all the private property owners who had their houses and their livelihoods burned down in 2020. Right? 1,000 people, most of whom were actually peaceful, while there were probably thousands of people who were violent who never got prosecuted after the riots in 2020. I mean, the government is much faster to protect its own rights than to your rights. What does that say about the government?
Well, and not just not prosecute people, but even people who did get prosecuted or charged with crimes were actively let go after those riots, right?
Or specific Democratic Party leaders fundraised to get them out for bail. Precisely. Now, I don't know how many have still wound up with charges or whatever.
Sure, but the sentiment and the intent behind that is very starkly contrasted on either side.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and it's also, the timing to me is also suspicious, as it always is. I'm always the guy to bring up it's probably a distraction from something narrative, right? Which, who knows? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But the timing across from everything that's going on with the Biden corruption scandal that is unfolding more and more by the day, it seems like an opportunity to pull some attention away, take some headline space away, dedicate it to how bad of a guy Trump is, and just maybe let some of the stuff that we're seeing unfold even this week with Devon Archer kind of go through the news cycle and maybe get a little bit less attention from perhaps the Democratic base, distract them with something with red meat, right? Oh yes, like they're going to get him on this third one for sure. And not look more critically at what's going on with the sitting president.
Yeah, I think the left needs this to be a thing because they made so much noise about January 6th and how bad it was for so long, that they spent a tremendous amount of political capital making this the defining characteristic of the Trump presidency. I think if they didn't have this, it would be kind of like they don't ever get that stamp of, and it ended, and there was a thing that happened that's condemning of Trump. Otherwise, it's just kind of left in the space of the last word is Trump's tweets about it, which is be peaceful, respect the police officers, that sort of thing.
So this is almost the final step of validating all of the attention,
the narrative that they put into it
that was paid. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And I think that's why they need it so much from a strategic point of view. Now, I will tell you that a lot of people in DC who deal in elections, this is how they think. They think in terms of how do we get the next media hit?
Right.
Right. So distraction, I think it's just a political campaign tactic. Is one analysis lens that I know Kyle would support.
Sure.
Well, I'm while you're talking right now, I'm trying to find that old Chuck Schumer clip of when he was on Rachel Maddow when Trump initially got elected back in 2016, and I'll see if I can.
Oh, Liam posted it.
I'll see. Oh, did Liam?
This is a good bridge
Twitter.
point. This also another major thing that happened this week was Joe Rogan and Jim Gaffigan. Is that his name?
That's his name.
Started talking about January 6th. Now I like the comedian he had on. Like he's a funny guy, but man, is he an NPC? Like if you want a good definition of like I only know one thing, and it's like the most basic, straightforward. Trump is bad. No lens on events. No historical integration between things.
Not even articulate viewpoints was my real takeaway from that. I remember I was working and listening to that in my head, and I was just like, I like Jim Gaffigan. I've seen him live. Like I've met him. I have a signed poster. Like I'm a fan of his. I lost respect, not because of his position. He can hold whatever opinions he wants, but because he held a position with so little backing it whatsoever and so little ability to actually articulate why or even what he thought about events that had occurred.
Yeah.
You know?
And so the relevant one from what Kyle's bridging to is that the accusation, and there has been a trickle of information about this, of various different denials about this, of the potential involvement of agent provocateurs by the government in the January 6th riots. So there's both video evidence that it looks very interesting of, for example, a guy breaking a window, being told not to do that, shoving another guy, and he's all masked up and then blaming that other guy when it's so obviously it was him. And the questions about that, like what was that? Now that doesn't necessarily, it's not a smoking gun. It's just saying, hey, this guy might have been one. It's a very suspicious activity. And we should be open to this because the left has been making noise about agent provocateurs within BLM. We covered on this agent provocateurs and FBI practices to entrap people using, literally encouraging people to do violence and then entrapping people. The Governor Whitmer case, we talked about that some months ago. So like there's a whole bunch of examples where the FBI kind of gets into this space. And then additionally that we have congressional testimony where I think it was Rand Paul asked, it was Thomas Massey, maybe, asked if there was any presence by DC police was one question. The other one is it was the Federal Bureau of Investigations at the Capitol on January 6th, and they could not answer yay or nay.
They could not say unequivocally, no, they were not
That's
involved.
what I remember.
If you are a small business owner looking for exponential growth, you have to connect with Adam Thuen at Intellectual Patriots. He will revolutionize your business game and help you get to the next level. Adam can streamline your business practices and advertising strategies to improve your bottom line. His expertise in data engineering means he can build you the systems you need to collect and analyze market data. His mission is to provide you with invaluable insights to fuel your success. From grant writing and business proposals to digital systems integrations, even AI management. Intellectual Patriots is a one-stop shop for cutting-edge solutions. Don't wait another second. Visit intelpatriots.com to learn more. That's INTEL Patriots.com.
I've just pulled up the Chuck Schumer clip that I was alluding to right here, so let's take a look at it.
This is the latest statement, latest tweet, as you were just saying, the president-elect's latest unsolicited pronouncement on the intelligence community. This was his tweet just a little while ago tonight. You see the scare quotes there. The intelligence briefing on so-called Russian hacking was delayed until Friday. Perhaps more time needed to build a case. Very strange. We're actually told, intelligence sources tell NBC News since this tweet has been posted, that actually this intelligence briefing for the president-elect was always planned for Friday. It hasn't been delayed. But he's taking these shots, this antagonism, this taunting to the intelligence community.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. So even for a practical, supposedly hard-nosed businessman, he's being really dumb to do this.
What do you think the intelligence community would do if they were motivated?
I don't know, but from what I am told, they are very upset with how he has treated them and talked about them. And we need the intelligence community. We don't know what's going on. Look at the Russian hacking. Without the intelligence community, we wouldn't have discovered it.
Do you think he has an agenda to try to dismantle parts of the intelligence community? I mean, this form of taunting hostility.
Whether you're a super liberal Democrat or a very conservative Republican, you should be against dismantling the intelligence community.
What are they gonna do to us? What is the intelligence community supposedly serving the American Constitution gonna do to us, guys? If you criticize them, what are they gonna do to us, Chuck? What
are the 6 ways from Sunday you're talking about? I'm a little...
It almost seems as though that the president wasn't in charge of the executive branch. That would be a problem. That means we're being run by something else. Right? I mean,
yes.
Isn't that what he's implying?
Well, it's one of those things where every now and then you just see these like moments of honesty from people, and they just kind of like let you peek behind what's behind there. But they just all know this. It's like, yes, we're not supposed to go against the intelligence community. Right. We just go along with it. That's just exactly how they operate. Like I'm reminded too of remember it was the same thing when Tucker Carlson was still working at Fox News. Remember he found out that the NSA was spying on him because he was trying to get an interview with Putin, and they were tapping his phones. And he got alerted from a whistleblower within the NSA that told him that this was happening, right? Like this is what happens when you go against this. If you're kind of pushing too many buttons, if you're going against the flow of what this apparatus, this bureaucracy wants, where they want to go.
So what that points to is that the intelligence community may have had a motive, right? We got means, motive, and opportunity. May have had a motive. We don't have any material evidence yet, so we don't have opportunity per se. But we do have a very clear motive. And we do have a little bit of evidence, circumstantial evidence, in that when asked, the right people in congressional hearing who are sworn under oath under legal penalty basically said, we don't know. Can't say about whether or not they were there. If they can't say, no, we were not there, given the amount of trust that this institution has garnered recently amongst the intelligence community, as it's lied to us on the Twitter files, lied to us on NSA spying, lied to us on weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, lied to us on MK Ultra and everything else going on. That's pretty much saying, yeah, we were there, right? Am I leaping to a conclusion?
Also remember everything with Ray Epps. Right. And there's a lot of speculation on him being, on him conducting and pushing people to go into the Capitol.
That became another part of this is the Ray Epps video also went viral in response to Joe Rogan referencing it in the Jim Gaffigan interview. And Ray Epps pretty much came out and said, oh, this is just more election denial, GN6 Trumperism. I mean, he basically talked in CNN speak and got re-quoted everywhere all over the media in response to Joe Rogan basically saying, hey, this dude said to go into the Capitol and was never prosecuted, yet thousands of other people were. Why? Great question.
No, and there's crazy videos of him getting up on like boxes and being like, everybody to the Capitol. Like he was one of the main drivers in the crowd for pushing people to it. And like, especially when you saw the people like at the fence kind of going crazy at the fence, like he was one of the provocateurs in there. And for some reason, the media just gave him a pass. Like everybody else, it's like, these are evil people. They stormed the Capitol. For some reason, this guy who was a clear provocateur, he's just fine. Gets a 60 Minutes interview. Like, how does it feel that Trump was attacking you? He's just like, it hurt real bad.
That's what's so crazy about it is like, I can't understand why Ray Epps is being treated so differently as you're pointing out. And I can't understand how they could be so naive of otherwise progressive people about the idea of agent provocateurs.
I mean, yeah, this isn't a new concept. I mean, I think it's probably been marginalized by, associating it with various conspiracy theories, but leftists know of this from like the WTO riots in Seattle, which was also referenced in that episode. I mean, this is a real thing that we know exists, right? And I think that it's unfortunately probably just a very partisan phenomenon, that people are just unwilling to examine certain things because it supports a narrative that is not their own. It supports a side that they view as the other, and it's not something that they want to entertain because they've created potentially a very strongly held belief in them that this is what happened, that these people are bad, and that our country was at risk. And I mean, that can be a really powerful thing to undo when that's everything that you've been told by media sources that you trust for 3+ years.
Also, I'm going to tie in 2 more things and how these all connect to the Twitter files too. Is I remember on the day this happened, I was glued to Twitter when all this was going down. There were tons of videos circulating around just because people were live tweeting everything that was happening of like black vans showing up to the Capitol and people jumping out in black vans and masks and stuff like that going in. And those all got scrubbed from the internet. And then also, this is also when Trump got banned from Twitter. was the day after this. I'm pretty sure it was January 7th when he got banned from Twitter. And we now also know the FBI was involved with the Twitter files. It's like all these things are connected. If you think that there's like one-off things, like they're all tie in together right here. So.
Well, and that's where people go, oh, that's conspiracy theory. Well, I mean, yes, it is by definition a conspiracy when multiple people work together to accomplish an end, right? In secret, right. But these secrets are coming out, so we have to be willing to be open-minded to the facts that are changing and changing our opinions with them. Right?
It's so insane to watch the left move into the war party, move into the intelligence state defender party. Right. It's so bizarre to me, right?
And the censorship party too.
I'm still locked into this view where I came into politics in the early 2000s, in which the right was terrible on civil liberties and war, and the left was better about that, and the left was bad on economics, and the right was good on that. And now we have this weird place where, I mean, obviously it makes it a little bit easier to vote Republican at times, where you have the Republicans talking about civil liberties, privacy, and intelligence agency reform, and being better on foreign policy all of a sudden. Like, how is that happening? Why is that happening right in this moment? Tribalism. Like, it's like this crazy moment of the left just losing what made them like an actual compelling party for a large number of people.
Well, I mean, the FBI, the intelligence community, all the banks, all the entities that the left used to rail against, they all started supporting all the shibboleths that the left promotes, right? It's diversity, equality, inclusion, all of these things started getting promoted. You know, just so happens, like right after Occupy Wall Street happened, all of a sudden the banks are like, we support gay marriage. And then the left's like, yeah. And then they forgot about the banks, right? And it's the same thing with all these the intelligence agencies and the military. Like, we're seeing all this stuff be very pervasive. It's spreading like a little mind virus throughout the entities, and everybody is going to jump in and support it because it's their virtue signaling that comes to it, right?
It's an interesting question, right? Because why did these major institutions and government actors suddenly become so reinforcing of the more woke culture, left woke culture, right after the Occupy Wall Street movement kind of fell apart and started to end? Right, because it isn't the story you're telling exactly, right? It wasn't like they came out and said, hey, by the way, we're for gay marriage. Like, I guess we'll just take down our camp now. It's more like it kind of trickled out, and then they kind of trickled in. And this weird change happened where all of a sudden people like Jimmy Dore, who are all very concerned about the accumulation of capital and are very skeptical of capitalism and think, unions are the best thing since sliced bread, are all of a sudden now being like, hey guys, don't like big banks even if they have a gay pride flag? Like, aren't these the bad guys? It's a strange, because he's kind of like a picture of the past, right? While we're in it now where it just isn't given much credence anymore.
Well, I think one of the big things too is Obama's reelection. Was Obama ran in the first time about ending all the wars, stopping, Guantanamo, all this stuff, right? Stopping torture. He didn't do any of that. Like, he didn't fulfill any of his campaign promises. But next time around, he couldn't run on, hey, I did all the things I told you I was going to do. It was just like, now I'm the first president to come out supporting gay marriage, right? Like, it's the same type of thing. It's just like, well, we failed drastically on all these other things that we said we were going to do. The banks are crumbling. Biggest financial crisis is still kind of hurting everybody. We're in more wars than ever. Drone bombing civilians. Yeah, I got a kill list. Oops. Like, all this stuff happens, but I support gay marriage. And everybody's like, yeah, cheer. Yeah, you go, man. Like, right?
So it's like supplanting for issues that really important issues that people should care about a lot, supplanting culture war stuff for that, trying to just say, hey, this is actually a good thing that I'm doing. Don't ignore the other stuff that I failed on, but like take this. And then it's a cascading effect. It's like, oh, well, now that worked. We could do it with another one. And that sort of, I think, maybe produced some of the chain of events that we've seen with ESG going forward, with all these social issues becoming like the core issues that people are really deciding, who they support based upon.
Well, and the ESG thing is a very important thing because that completely captures intellectually like all of corporate America, especially because the primary people that are pushing it through are Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street.
Mm-hmm.
And between them, they have top shares in like 80% of all public companies in the country, right? Yeah. So like they're able to push this through, and it's all a control mechanism. Like it's a means of control. It's not necessarily about money, like really. It's much more about control. Like control and power is more important than money. Money is just like a vehicle to power. Mm-hmm. But it's the exact same type of thing right here, is where you have it and you kind of start to infiltrate all of these avenues, and you can control who gets where. You can kind of you just control everything with it. And then you kind of control who becomes the next president. You kind of control you control what's going on in all these other countries. Like it's a very powerful position to be in, to be the money managers that are saying exactly you have to fill these quotas, right? Because then everybody's leaping to vie for that.
Totally. Well, and it's also, if we want to pivot to the Devon Archer piece, it's also a powerful position to be in when you can tell your clients that you can get them on the phone with your dad, who's the vice president, which is what we learned was happening now, with even more confirmation of those facts from Hunter Biden's former business associate, Devon Archer, who was in front of Congress in a closed door meeting, right? Mm-hmm. Just, giving them his testimony, despite an attempt at having him jailed, days or the day before he was supposed to give this testimony. The DOJ asked the court to advance some charge against him, ostensibly to try to prevent him from testifying in front of Congress. Mm-hmm. They failed. The judge did not grant that. And so he did get to give his testimony to Congress, and he did sit down with Tucker Carlson and give what seems to be the first part of perhaps a longer interview, talking about some of these things. And let's go ahead and watch this clip here.
To be, completely clear on the calls, I don't know if it was an orchestrated call in or not. It certainly was powerful, though, because, if you're sitting with a foreign business person and you hear the vice president's voice, that's prize enough. I mean, that's pretty impactful stuff for anyone.
It's been reported, and I know that it is true, that the Hunter and his brother were very close to their dad.
Absolutely.
Which I think is great.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of kids. I'm very close to them, talk to them every day.
Yeah.
Never called them on speaker during a business meeting. That's weird. You've got a lot of kids. You're close to them. Do you call them on speaker during business meetings?
Do I call?
I mean, what is that? A grown man calling his dad on a speakerphone during a business meeting?
Right. To be clear, sometimes it was the call was coming in and the speaker would go on. So it's just the president. You have to be, you understand DC, right? So the power to have that access and that conversation, and it's not in a scheduled conference call, and it's a part of your family, that's like the pinnacle of power in DC.
100%. I guess I'm pivoting against the lie that I'm hearing people tell with a straight face. Congressman Goldman, for example, that we don't really know what was going on. Really? You're taking a call from the vice president and you put it on speaker. It's not just, hey, Dad, I'm in a meeting with some buddies.
Right.
It's let me put my dad, the vice president, on speaker.
Yeah. Yep. In the rear view, it's an abuse of soft power, I'd say.
An abuse of soft power.
Well, geez, what's soft power, guys? What would it mean to abuse that soft power?
Yeah.
So this is what they call influence peddling, right? And this, like they say, is very common in DC. It's a phenomena of the decision makers are insulated by staff and process and all these things. And if you want to get something really done, you need to know somebody who knows something. And that was what was interesting about the actual transcript of the Republican House Oversight Committee's hearing, which it pretty much reveals that he basically had no actual value to the company that he has with Archer other than that he's the guy who knows the guy?
Because the company that they had established, according to this interview, was sort of a company, a consulting company to provide services. How did he put it? That they had, regulatory insight or something of that nature, right? Providing insight into navigating the regulatory environment. Basically just saying, we got a guy on the inside and we can call him when we need to.
Well, or at least that you know the guy who knows the guy, right? So you know the guy who runs the lobby firm that has the guy who used to work in this particular obscure agency who can call up the right person out of that agency to get something done. That is not just common. It is the entire bread and butter of politics. Right, that's true if you're in the state legislature in Montana. It's true if you're in Iowa. It's true everywhere. I've never met a political person who hasn't been a person in the chain of this sort of phenomenon. Now, the question is, once you get into foreign policy, right, it's another thing just to say, hey, in domestic policy, we have this approval for this patent. I know a guy at the patent office. I'm going to give him a call, and he can give me some information about where it's at in the process. It's a different thing when you say he's going to prioritize it beyond what's legally, statutorily allowed to do, right? Those are controls on bureaucrats that supposedly exist in some situations in order to prevent abuse, but not all. A lot of them have a lot of authority to make these sort of prioritization decisions. But when it comes to foreign policy and the actions of a foreign actor, such as Ukraine, Russia, an energy company in Ukraine called Burisma, what is the bounds of reasonable influence? You have this president's son who sits on the board of the bank. We're not talking about his private equity advisement firm. This is a different gig that both of them had as members of this board of advisors for a energy company called Burisma.
And when you say both of them, you mean Hunter Biden
and Archer.
And Devin Archer.
And Devin Archer. We're both on this board. And keep in mind, none of them know anything about energy. They're both just people who know people in DC, right? And so the question is why would they hire those two? Why would they put those guys on the board? Why would they pay them $85,000 a month to do this work? And then why was this all necessary? And how does this relate to why it would be so compelling for Republicans to get this information out about this whole thing? Well, what is soft power? Influence peddling means when I say, hey, we need to fire this guy, we need to go after this guy, we got to cite this thing, I got somebody to call at the State Department who can maybe do something about that. Right? And that guy happens to be the vice president. That's the question. And if that's the services that he was offering, is that illegal? Should it be illegal if it's not?
Great question. Is it?
I don't know. So influence peddling, if what we mean is the president isn't saying, or the vice president at the time isn't saying, hey, you should go after this prosecutor who's looking into Burisma. If he says you should fire this guy because my son's belongs to the board, that would obviously be illegal. But if he says, hey, you should do this and then I'll do this, and they say, hey, we don't have any reason to do that, and he says, well, you're not going to get the funds then, is that illegal?
I guess I don't really know.
I think
I'm not sure what.
I think
words
the
would make it
legality
illegal.
here has something to do with it's kind of like a question of whether or not you're a foreign agent because you're getting like money directly from a foreign entity. Like I think that there's something in there that could be like it's potentially a treason charge on the legality side here.
Yeah, that wouldn't be influence peddling per se. That would be something
influence
else.
peddling,
Yeah, it'd be
but
something way beyond that.
it's something beyond influence peddling. Like there's
Right.
influence peddling, and then there's like the direct payment and working for another country kind of a thing.
Right,
Like
right. So
that becomes a thing.
So the leftists have said, hey, everyone wanted that prosecutor god, Shokin. They wanted this. Okay, should I retell the story just to make it clear to listeners?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's lay it out from the top.
All right.
Ukraine from circa 2014.
There's a lot of
right?
Slavic names here, so I might get something wrong. So correct me if I get my Slavic name wrong, please.
I will try to check you.
Okay. All right. Let me try to tell this story right. 2014. There's this thing called the Maidan Revolution, where there was a Russian government that was supportive, and then they got kicked out. Various NGOs were involved. Soros identified NGOs and potentially intelligence community like allied NGOs. They go in and basically have this color revolution in Ukraine.
What's a color revolution?
Well,
Never mind. Keep going.
Color revolutions are like, it's a common thing where they pick a color to represent their revolution.
Oh.
And there's like a trend of them that a lot of people who are skeptical of the intelligence communities have said, hey, for some reason, all these ones that have the fingerprints of the intelligence community on them all seem to pick a color, and that's kind of strange. So, yeah.
And it's supposed to represent a wave of democracy sweeping through.
Yes.
That's what it's supposed
Every
to.
single time. It just so happens to be a pro-democratic one. And they, yeah.
Okay,
Well, there's a very specific, like it comes from, I actually just double check. There's some political scientists that named that specifically.
Yes.
Like it is supposed to be a wave of democracy.
Okay, so Maidan Revolution. Go.
Yeah. New guy comes in. He's pro-EU. With that switch, Burisma was before that time kind of associated with the more pro-Russian party. And around that same period of time, they hire a guy, two guys, maybe more, to realign them to the new reality, which is that Ukraine is now going to be pro-EU, pro-NATO. And one of those guys happens to be Hunter Biden.
Okay,
Right? So he kind of helps realign Burisma with it for the State Department. Like, this is the theory. And that the State Department then has a closer relationship with Burisma. Sometime later, this guy Shokin, under the existing president at that time, Poroshenko. There we go. God, Poroshenko, who then says he started this attorney general functionally starts investigating Burisma for corruption, and Poroshenko gets a call from Biden. There is a released audio tape where Biden's basically saying, hey, we got connection. What's going on with the AG guy? And he's like, hey, we don't have anything on the guy, but we're vaxxed him to resign. Like, he doesn't have any corruption charges. There's no reason for him to resign that we can cite. And then we also have, on the other side of it, Biden talking at a press dinner. I don't know what event it is, but he's at an event and he's saying, yeah, this is how awesome I am.
This is
going to Ukraine, right?
This is a hot mic situation. He does not know he's being recorded.
Oh, I think he is. I think he does. How does he not?
It doesn't. It sounds
I just think
like
he's trying to be cool.
Well, maybe.
I just don't think he realized what he was doing, right? I mean, like, because he's like, the way he tells the story, he's just like, there I was, rolling up with my aviators on. And I go, and I'm like, I kick down the door. I'm like, hey, you're going to fire this prosecutor or you ain't getting no money. They're like, oh, you can't do that. He's like, get the president on the line. He's like, call the president. Go ahead. Do it right now. We'll see what he says. Sunglasses back on. And goddamn it, they fired that prosecutor. That prosecutor was Shokin. All right. So One American News got an interview with the guy and they talk about it and say, hey, you got to get the transcripts of the Biden Shokin interview. And some of that was released. It does seem edited. So obviously take it with a grain of salt. And One American News is not the worst news organization ever. For God's sakes, the New York Times lied us into a war that killed 1 million people. So like, I got to keep it all with a grain of salt. But it's definitely, just be careful when consuming anything that any news agency puts out. But the interesting component of that is this fact that you have Shokin, who still exists, get interviewed by only one news network, which is a relatively obscure one. And the things he says is quite revelatory about, he was never like accused of anything. He had to resign and why he had to resign. Like all these things that bear up, they simply don't make a lot of sense. So the question was those actions by the State Department on behalf of his son, who was on the board of an energy company, who was being investigated by this guy, did Biden do that for his son? And the response was like, no, everyone knew that guy had to go. Right? Not everyone. Not that, like
he
that,
had to go.
That is so weak.
But not for any like criminal reason.
They can't, I haven't seen one sordid reason why Shokin had to go. So the question is what was Biden's motivation? Now we have material evidence, two sources, both himself and Shokin in this release audio. And then we have, we have means, right? We have motive. And we have material evidence that he was doing this. We just don't have the smoking gun of him saying to somebody, I did this in order to help out Hunter. So we got a lot of evidence, and it's all over the fingerprints are all over this thing, so that he was heavily involved. 20 calls with various different members of various different foreign regimes and business and stuff like that, with him on the phone, just so happens to be on the phone. That's what Tucker Carlson's talking about, where he's just calling up daddy to put him into the middle of this business meeting. Why would he do that? Well, because the entire operation was built around his ability to leverage the State Department like he did in Ukraine on behalf of this business because Hunter was on the board. That's the point. That's obvious. That's got to be illegal. If it's not illegal, that is the biggest scandal that I could imagine. If it isn't illegal to use State Department resources, taxpayer resources, to benefit your son on a board of an energy company when it's being investigated.
This is a small detail, but probably worth noting though too, is like this is when Biden was vice president and he was kind of considered like the lead in Ukraine for the Obama administration. It wasn't just like, like he was considered like the head honcho when it came to Ukraine policy within the executive branch at the time. Worth noting too. Like he wasn't just some official at the time.
And also worth noting, Trump administration also got similar accusations of influence peddling by Trump's children, right? Don Jr. and Ivanka both got favorable treatments by foreign governments afterwards. Ivanka, there's a Guardian story about like a copyright request, like getting approved quicker than otherwise would, stuff like that. So it's very possible that this could be a real thing, right? That is bipartisan. I don't care. I think it's evil to use taxpayer dollars to benefit your son. I'm sorry. I just think that's wrong.
Well, and if it ever comes out, if there's ever the smoking gun of the 10% for the big guy quote that has been floating around forever is real, if Biden ever actually got paid for any of the stuff that he's doing, directly or indirectly, that's super, super illegal.
Right.
And like that, I think, is why a lot of the establishment media and Democrats are really, really nervous about this whole thing going on right now, because the 10% for the big guy thing is out there. There's already circumstantial evidence that he did get paid for stuff.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's where it starts to go into like the treason territory, like as like an actual legal definition.
Because you're taking money from a foreign entity, especially if it's China, and I know there are claims around their dealings in China with various different entities. That raises questions of whether or not our commander-in-chief is capable of being blackmailed by a foreign government, because the foreign government could easily say, hey, if you don't do what we want, we're going to come out and we're going to reveal the fact that we paid you for this.
What's even more fascinating too with this is exactly what they tried to accuse Trump of being with Russia, right? Like this was the whole thing, is that he is a foreign agent of Russia. And so far, nothing's really come out like with that. Is it doesn't seem to be the case that he was a foreign agent for Russia, but it seems very much to be the case that like Biden was legitimately like a foreign agent in a sense for Ukraine.
I mean, pretty handy tactic
if not
too.
China, like there's some China allegations in there too.
Just blame your political adversary for the things that you yourself have done, and
That's in Rules for Radicals.
Right.
It's an actual tactic.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right? So like that process of saying, I know this is a vulnerability for me, so I'm going to accuse it of you first, is a huge problem. Now, I don't necessarily know that was, but I imagine anytime you're dealing in large foreign policy questions like the president is, you're going to get into this. You're going to get these kind of accusations thrown at you at this juncture, right? Because it's so hyper partisan. There's just, especially if you're outside the foreign policy consensus, where everyone's making a buck off of the existing status quo.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Zesty Beverages. They're on a mission to the standard American diet by crafting drinks with fewer calories and more nutrients from real food. Their lineup of delicious offerings now includes Electric Peak Yerba Mate, postbiotic sodas, keto-friendly, ready-to-drink margaritas, and hard teas. Wondering what a postbiotic soda is? Well, head on over to zestybev.com to learn more and find a retailer near you. Once again, check them out online at zestybev.com. That's zestybev.com. Well, right, and especially in Ukraine, which is a country that is just so incredibly corrupt and has been known to be such for so long, right? I mean, like there's just the fact that people think that this country is this pure democracy and all that. I mean, it does kind of lead us into this third piece about the journalist who was detained there. It's just nonsensical to think that, the narratives that we're being told about how good Ukraine is are true. Like, it's very obvious that like these things, this influence peddling takes place here. And if it takes place here, it takes place there for sure, and probably an order of magnitude greater, potentially.
And that's what this guy, Gonzalo Lira, basically says, is that the Ukrainian regime has, not just recently, but has always been, this veneer of liberal democracy over a corrupt Eastern European gangster state. That there's this fundamental core that everything abides by, the rules of power, principle of power. And we've only surface level, for the sake of the NGOs and for the sake of the support by the liberal elite, been able to create this veneer over it that says that, they respect the rule of law and they are pro free speech and pro freedom of religion and all these things that Westerners value. Well, his story is a testament to why that is, pardon my French, Bullshit. Sorry, Mom. So let's go into guns. So one of the reasons why we talked about doing this is because it is like a human interest story that I think anchors what's really going on in Ukraine more clearly for the average listener. And one of the things is we get a qualitative view, right? Or a quantitative view. We get this many bombs and dollars and all that kind of stuff, and this territory taken, and it's all abstracted, rather than the actual human cost of war and what that means for civil liberties and what that means for the everyday person trying to articulate what they see as true. And that's this guy's story. So first up, he's an American citizen, born in California. He has dual citizenship with Chile, but he resides in Ukraine. He reported for Business Daily News and Zero Hedge, right? So he released this tweet thread that Kyle has up that basically lays out his history, what's been going on with him over the last few months since he kind of went dark in his reporting.
Should we go ahead and read it?
It's pretty long, but I can summarize it.
Okay.
Basically, and then he also released a video, which we'll put in the links, and you can watch the whole video because it is compelling to watch this guy literally sit along the border, like not far from the border, on his motorcycle, wearing his motorcycle gear, basically saying, "I'm about to go for asylum in Hungary because the Lizinski regime wants to kill me, right? Wants to put me in prison where I will die." So he's basically being charged with being a Russian propagandist, and that faces 5 to 8 years in a Ukrainian prison work camp. Let me say that again, and if this triggers anything strange for you, don't worry. That just means you're sane. 5 to 8 years for criticizing the government at a work camp
in a country that is supposedly a liberal democracy, a European style democracy, whatever they call it, right?
Yeah.
Supposedly. And we're over there, mind you, supporting them, giving them billions of dollars, defending democracy in a country where Zelensky, because he doesn't like what he's saying in some YouTube videos, can put a guy in prison for 5 to 8 years.
Right. So this is actually the second time he's been accused of this. He was actually accused of being an actual agent of the Russian regime. That was disproven, or at least no evidence could come out, so they couldn't actually do anything with it. He was given like his passports and all that kind of stuff, and then basically said, you're free to go. And apparently later on, he regrets not just leaving at that point, because they then came back for him, confiscated all his stuff. He was told he could post bail, called loved ones, called a lawyer. He was never given those rights. He was tortured in prison, is what he claims. Beaten by other prisoners, interestingly, paid off by guards. Right. So the important thing there is that you can't maintain the facade of a liberal democracy if you torture your people. Right. But everyone knows weird things happen in prison. So all you got to do is to get around this facade of liberal democracy is pay off the prison guards. And he said one of the guys actually apologized as he was beating them.
Because he knew, I have to. Because how can a prisoner tell a guard, no, I'm not going to torture another prisoner?
Right.
Otherwise, they're going to be the subject of the torture.
They're not going to get food. They're not going to get to go to the bathroom when they want to, all that kind of stuff. So he then claims that the American and Chilean government did put pressure on the Ukrainian government to eventually let him post bail. He posted bail. They took his passports. They took all of his stuff. He took his computer, his laptop, all that kind of stuff. And they confiscated $9,000 in cash. He then got released and got a bunch of that stuff all back. All coincidentally, all the stuff that he would need in order to escape the country. He didn't have to put on the ankle bracelet, although he was told he should have. He got his license for his motorcycle, his insurance for his motorcycle, his passports, all that kind of stuff were all returned to him. And then said, now you got a court date that's going to come up later on. Now, while in prison, he has this conversation with his last time he was imprisoned. And they basically said, hey, they did that. This other prisoner tells him, hey, they did that in order for you to just leave, so you're not going to be a headache anymore.
Yeah, when he said, when the government tells you don't leave the country, they're telling you, leave the fucking country.
Yeah.
Just get out of here.
We don't want you around.
Yeah.
And especially when they give you your passport.
Right.
They didn't want you to leave. They wouldn't give you the passport.
Right.
So he was like, ooh. And so then he's basically posts this thing that says, hey, I'm going to try to get out of the country. And if you don't hear from me in 11 hours, I'm probably in a work camp. And it's been 5 days and he has yet to post again. So he was probably caught at the border. He was probably being sent to a work camp. Now, let me make this point clear. This guy basically holds the same views that I do on Ukraine. right? I mean, maybe a little more. He's a little more brash than I am. I've watched some of his videos. I didn't really follow him before finding out about him, but he holds completely reasonable, like completely like I'm engaged seriously with the topic. I'm looking at these actors not as a religious cult, but as a sane human being trying to suss out the truth, and I'm articulating the world as I see it. Please correct me where I'm wrong. That is the tone of what he's doing. Elon Musk even posted on his Twitter thread, troubling posts. Very interesting. I didn't notice that. And it is
specifically underneath the part of the thread where he says, if you don't hear from me in the next 12 hours, well, I'm on my way to a labor camp. Wish me luck.
Think about that for a minute, that this is the paragon of democracy that we have to support in order not to have a more authoritarian world. That's the case, that's the myth that they're telling the American public in order to sell this thing to you. It's the weapons of mass destruction all over again. And yet a substantial amount of people, this time just the other faction of the American public, is being fooled into believing that this is a necessary thing. It's a real tragedy.
It really is. And to be fair, we did pull up a headline that did say he has yet to.
It was an article
turn up.
It was an article from 2 days ago that I saw. Was the last thing I saw on it, and it said that he's still missing. So
he's still missing. So we don't know that he's in a labor camp. Just to be very clear about what we do and don't know. We don't know that.
I would generally assume a guy like this would be tweeting though.
You would think, but also to that point, it does make me wonder if he had just very discreetly slipped out of the country without broadcasting this and making it a publicity stunt. If he could have not made it through, but because this probably was high profile enough for Elon to chime in, probably made its way back to the powers that be within the US government or Ukraine, calling attention to the fact that he is literally calling them out and blowing the whistle effectively about their atrocious behavior, which I do support him doing, but it may have also put him in danger.
Mm-hmm. I mean, leaving also might have been a trap.
True.
Right? Where they say, give those things to him, and he actually mentions it, and then they're going to pick him up at the board. Now he's trying to escape. Now he isn't serving 5 to 8 years. He's going to serve 10 to 12.
Right.
Right.
For a valid reason.
Yeah.
Right. Versus one that was just trumped up.
Yeah.
Yeah. But either way, I mean, any way you slice it, if true, it just completely demolishes any semblance of the myth, as you say, that this is a liberal democracy that we're over here defending. It's that veneer with the rotten core of corrupt gangster regime underneath.
Well, it's important to note why they have to have a myth, right? Why is it necessary to do that this way? Why can't they just come out and say, we need to degrade the powers of the Ukrainian or the Russian military?
Well,
why wouldn't that work?
They do say that.
No, they don't. They only do that when, they don't do that as the main thrust, right? Tim Scott came out and tried to say that and got smashed, right?
Yeah.
Why did they need to make it a battle? Why did Woodrow Wilson need to say that the German Kaiser was killing babies, right? And was out to destroy democracy all over the world if he wasn't stopped? Why did they constantly have to have this mythos?
And then he goes on and talks about how we need to make the world safe for democracy. Like this is the whole thing, is that this is this magic word that people use to kind of cast a spell on you. And you need the mythology in order to get the populace on board with something.
Right.
Right.
Because in a normal environment, in a normal world, I have just as much in common with a Ukrainian citizen as I do with a Russian citizen, as I do with an Iranian or an Israeli citizen or a Chinese citizen or anybody else. And so they need the reason for people to get pissed off about something. They need the mythology in order to rile people up to support it, because ultimately they know they can't just do these things without at least the implicit support of the people whose tax dollars are spending. Mm-hmm. If they do go too far, they do know that people can mount enough resistance to stop them from doing stuff like this.
Well, I believe it was Plato that coined this term. Maybe it was someone before him, but a long time ago. The concept of the noble lie. And what the whole concept of the noble lie is like the general proletariat, the general proles of civilization, if they actually knew the truth, they wouldn't get on board with something, or they would bastardize it, or they wouldn't understand. They don't understand that the high privileged people, we understand what's kind of best for our people or the world or whatever it is, whatever their goal is. We understand it. So we have to put forward these lies in order to be able to get the things done that need to be done. It's a very like amoral way of viewing the world. Is like, we know what has to happen. They don't understand it. So we have to put forward some sort of mythos in order for them to get on board, whether or not it's true, or maybe it's half true, or maybe it's,
right. Sort of an ends justify the means argument, right?
Right. So you need to have a myth that rallies people to you. Now, in the Marxist literature, it's called a Sorelian myth. Right. Marcus Sorel basically said, we know that that Marxism, communism isn't scientific. We know that the history is wrong. We know that the future predictions are actually all wrong, that the proletariat is not going to go up and overthrow everything. But we need it in order to keep the Russian state alive. So we're going to continue to propagate the myth, even after they all know who's in the elite, that it's all false, right? It's about telling a story that people can buy into that allows them to justify something they otherwise wouldn't justify. So one of the best things you can do when thinking about politics, one of the best things that we talk about, we want to equip people in order to better understand the news and better understand the world. Lose your illusions first. It's way more important to lose an illusion of truth than it is to find something that you're absolutely certain about. Losing the magic words, right? When Kyle says cast a spell on you, I think he means that technically.
Yes,
there are magic words that exist, and you're a human being that lives by words having meaning. And you're a human being that lives by a reputational system that says, I don't want to get so far outside of my reputational system that I end up losing face, right? This is like deep down monkey brain type stuff. And when you say democracy, there's a certain group of people who are going to go, well, I can't be seen having, opposing democracy. So therefore, any amount of Ukrainian bodies or a blood sacrifice I am willing to tolerate to keep democracy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's just, in the way that hacks the brain is the spell in this case. And
it's literally like a flip gets switched. It's like you believe one thing and then they say, but in order to preserve democracy, and you're like, flip switch. Oh yes, in order to preserve democracy, and then you move on to the next thing, right?
Right. In order to preserve the future, we have to, even though we know Iraq was a lie, we have to make sure that we stay there and we plan a new, government. Let me give you an example of like what the elites really believe versus what they say. So, we're sounding very Alex Jonesy right now, but I'm going to give you a real source stuff here. Okay.
We have the documents.
I got the documents. The Project for a New American Century, right? Released by the CFR basically says, hey, this is an idea for how the future of the United States might be able to use its unipolar moment, or us as the sole superpower after the collapse of the Soviet Union, for good. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the Middle East and we're going to overthrow these countries, and we're going to create them as liberal democracies, because liberal democracies don't attack each other, and that will cause peace in the Middle East and yada, yada, yada. All right. It's more sophisticated than that. I'm giving a very truncated vision of what it says. But the policy end goal was invade certain countries and to create peace in the Middle East and create long-term prosperity across the globe. America is going to use its unipolar moment in this way that will increase democracy, right? They didn't mean that as a magic word. They literally just thought that was the best way to create peace, right? Because democracies tend not to attack each other. This was a way to take the sins of the past of colonialism and the creation of these Middle Eastern states and turn it into a peaceful and prosperous future by their point of view. I'm steel manning their point of view. And then to the public, they said, Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. And they're a threat to the liberal world order. And they're trying to get a nuke. Oh, did you know that they might have something to do with Al-Qaeda? They never did. But we lied about
Saddam
that.
literally has babies in incubators.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah. That was Iraq War I, right?
Yeah. That's pre.
Saddam invading Kuwait goes in, like, there was a myth propagated by a very particular person. This is well documented in Scott Horton's work about them going into hospitals and killing babies in incubators. Right. And it was completely false, completely made up, and everyone knows it. And people probably at the time went, that's probably BS, but I'm going to repeat it because it's an interesting story.
Did he really gas his own people?
Oh, for sure. But it was with our weapons. It was the weapons we gave him to fight against the Iranians in the Cold War. So,
but they didn't. That wasn't enough.
And
really,
technically,
for them
it wasn't his people. It was the people that the Sykes-Picot Agreement crammed into his country in order to make a full country, because we didn't want a unified Shiite or Sunni majority. We wanted Kurds to be cut up into 3 different groups so they couldn't be their own group. So it was actually the Kurds who were giving them a hard time. right? And he was doing exactly what most governments do, which is prosecute minorities, right? So, like, if we invaded every country that prosecuted a minority, one, we wouldn't exist because the British would have invaded us a long time ago, and two, like, it would be a lot of different countries. That doesn't justify it. It just says that, you know, the use of those weapons was, one, something we enabled, two, created the conditions therein as the West, right? Specifically in this case, the British bear the brunt of the blame because of the reason why Iraq has the shape of a country that it does is because of the Sykes-Picot Agreement and the various agreements afterwards.
And that was British led.
Yes.
Back to World War II.
Yeah. Well, no, in the entire alliance, right? I mean, but British is the ones who actually held it. That's why BP was such a major factor in Iran and Iraq, is because a lot of the oil fields were developed by British Petroleum. Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this goes way, way, way back before World War One.
So the
Sykes-Picot was before World War One?
No, you're right. You're right. It was after World War One.
Was it between? Yeah, was it after World War One or
Yeah,
World War Two?
World War One.
That.
So the more recent invasion of Iraq under George W. Bush, you know, with the assertion that they had weapons of mass destruction, was basically the liberal world order kind of saying, okay, we want to enact this vision that we see for the world, but in order to sell that vision to the public, we need to have this narrative, this story of weapons of mass destruction, threat to democracy, all of that stuff, in order to get people to support it to go in.
And they also had needed a catalyzing moment, and they got that with 9/11. Now, I'm not saying that the government did 9/11. What I'm saying is they took advantage of an opportunity, right? I'm going to criticize the right and the conspiratorial right real quick. Just because two events happened that happened to serve the same interest does not mean that they were caused by a centralizing agency, right? So just because a bioleak, a leak of a virus in Wuhan, China, happens to coincide with a bunch of people switching to a more Chinese response pandemic policy, doesn't mean that those two things were caused in interest of one another. That just means that two things happened and a bunch of actors saw the incentive and responded to it decentrally. So a bunch of people saw that and said, hey, this is a great opportunity for us to test out the thing that we've been working on since the George Bush administration, to drop the Swedish model and start implementing a more statist model for pandemic response by incarcerating not the vulnerable, by incarcerating everybody to prevent spread. So the same thing with the war in Iraq, right? So 9/11 happens. That happens because of reasons that we understand, right? By Al-Qaeda to America for reasons that we have means, motive, material evidence, smoking gun. We have everything to believe that it happened exactly the way we think it did. That said, the government definitely did not allow the crisis to go away. They passed the Patriot Act. They decided to use this 2 days afterwards. 2 days, according to an autobiography by Secretary of Defense at the time. They were already talking about Iraq after 9/11. Now, it took a long time to build up the case for why they also want to do that, but Afghanistan and Iraq became a major priority of the administration really soon. Not for the reason that you were told, right, because of weapons of mass destruction, but because of the neoconservative movement and the belief, fundamentally, not to just pull off the plan from a project for a new American century, but rather to see those broad general goals and to try to get them realized in the time that they had where they were in power. And that's what they did. And that's it doesn't require a centralizing conspiratorial force. It just requires people to have ideas, to have incentives, to have moments of opportunity, and then to take advantage of them when you're aligned in principle and vision.
Absolutely.
And that it requires no centralizing force or conspiracy, like the Illuminati or the whatever.
Right.
Well, and because like the never let a crisis go to waste is attributed to a lot of people. Like Rahm Emanuel said it about the financial crisis. Winston Churchill said it about it. Said it about the formation of the United Nations. And it's just like these moments, these crazy moments that kind of gets everybody's energy focused into a certain direction, like 9/11 or financial crisis or whatever. This is prime opportunity for the wizards to cast their spells. like this is like when COVID happened. This is the prime opportunity to start pushing in vaccine passports, lockdowns, et cetera, right? When 9/11 happens, this is the prime opportunity to start pushing forward the project for a new American century vision, because it's that now we have an opportunity to get all of the regular people on board because we can have a central mythos about something, right?
Well, and I think it's really interesting timing that this comes post-COVID, because that was an enormous opportunity where everyone was put through an extremely traumatic event and then basically shoved out the other side in such a way that aligned everyone's awareness and mentality towards going back to normal, right? And Dr. Matthias Desmet talks about this in The Psychology of Authoritarianism, which is his book talking about what mass formation psychosis is, which he lays out exactly what that is, all of the steps that are required in order to put a population into basically a collective hypnosis where they're very, very malleable and very directional and able to be maneuvered towards whatever end that you want. And so going through COVID put the world's population into that sort of state, according to Dr. Matthias Desmet. And then you notice as soon as COVID is over, Ukraine war, and boom, everyone that was super pro, lockdown or whatever it was, on a given narrative regarding COVID was all of a sudden, almost without fail, all in support of Ukraine.
Well, and continuing the medical terminology, if you are an outlier that is defying the crowd's collective vision towards something, their collective push, that's when the white blood cells attack, right?
Right.
And then you have to be pushed out of, you got unpersoned, debanked, banned on your social media, right? Like these are just like the new formations of how the white blood cells attack in current society.
Nigel Farage has been debanked.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, and
crazy.
And something what Nigel Farage said too is there's a lot of people that have been debanked, but they're afraid to say so publicly because it'll affect their credit scores, right?
Whoa.
So you have a lot of powerful people that are powerful people. Right. I don't know if I would say Nigel Farage is powerful if he's getting debanked from every major institution.
Retired. That was the thing. He Brexit happened and he was like, I'm out. This is what I was here for. I've been here doing this for 2 decades and I'm out.
Now he's just like a speaker. He's like a public speaker.
Yeah.
Right?
But he got debanked. That's so crazy.
Yeah.
Like that's a major political figure. That'd be like Jordan Peterson getting debanked, right? Or not quite that level of fame, but major American figure, or in this Canadian or whatever, but a major figure in the politics of their country.
Well, remember back in the day when the Patreon scandals were happening, because Patreon is for those that don't know, Patreon's a thing for content creators to kind of go for an alternative payment system away from YouTube for like a subscription service kind of a thing. And who was it originally that got hit? I can't remember who. Was it Alex Jones?
Ruben.
It was Ruben.
Yeah.
There was a string of people that all got, I think Milo Yiannopoulos, I think it was like a bunch of people that all got hit. And Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson both kind of came together and said that we're going to leave Patreon because of this. And Patreon came out and said, it's not us that wants to ban all these people. It's MasterCard that says they will not continue services with us unless we get rid of these people. Right?
That's
so
crazy.
and you can go, MasterCard, Visa, all these major payment processors, they have lists of like people that cannot work with, like these lists are public.
Why do these lists exist? What is the forcing function for that? Because you'd think as a merchant you would be like, I just want
as many people on here so I can acquire transaction fees, right?
Right.
I think as Kyle said earlier, the money is just a tool. What the real pursuit is the control, is the power. To say, I can dictate if you can use my service or not. I don't need your money. I have everyone else's money. It's fine.
It's funny because there's all kinds of public access laws too. Right. Like if you're a business available for public, to discriminate is actually very difficult to do typically. And there are lots of belief discrimination protections. So I'd wonder about that. Like someone should sue MasterCard. Maybe.
Well, I mean, how do you look at, say GoFundMe or whatever it was that decided to cancel the fundraising campaign for the Marine truckers, for the Marine who, killed the guy on the subway trying to protect the people on the train or, whatever.
Well, this was also the Canadian truckers
truckers
it was also GoFundMe.
Exactly. Like how do you look at these companies and not suggest the same thing? They're all sort of implicitly allowed to do it. It seems like because the power structure in place agrees with their reasonings and agrees with the fact that they don't support the people who they're debanking effectively. So why would they prosecute them for that?
I do. So there's 2 cases there that I do just trying to apply some philosophy to it. One sense that as a private business, they have a right to be able to deny, using their business with somebody. Sure. Right? I think that principally, right? I would just say that there are lots of laws that don't follow that principle since the Civil Rights Act that I wonder about whether or not they're actually in violation of, and some lawyer could make a lot of money, maybe take advantage of that. And then second, the fraud, right? The thing that was particularly disturbing about the truckers thing is they didn't reimburse people.
Yeah.
What they gave to that.
Just froze their accounts.
To themselves or to other people. That's fraud. That you can't, that seems very illegal to me. And once again, someone could make a lot of money suing on that behalf.
Well, and then there enter things like the DEI, the ESGs, more of these acronyms that are always thrown around. But when you enter into that, is like all these companies are public shareholders. They all have to follow certain things in order to be kind of considered as part of the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ or any. You have to hit certain quotas. And, you got to impress Larry Fink. And if you don't impress Larry Fink, say goodbye to a lot of your shareholder value. Like these things are major, aspects to this. And you want a good S on your ESG score. And if you don't have a good S, like that's a problem. Like you're not benefiting your shareholders according to Larry Fink. And Larry Fink controls the economy, like for the most part. Like he's not like but like he has major influence over the economy. Like he puts out a quarterly report about the S&P 500 and it's very important. It's very important. So like if you're not following these certain protocols that are kind of laid forward for you, like I always say, ESGs are like a Trojan horse, and they're a means of control. You slip right in, and then that is how you kind of control the apparatus. You have these entities coming in and they buy up 25% of the public shares of the companies, and then they have all the voting rights on here. They're able to push things, and then the companies have to go for them. Like this is how corporate America has become like co-opted by these movements right here. I highly recommend you listening to the Twitter Spaces between David Sachs, Elon Musk, and Vivek Ramaswamy. They spend like a good 30 minutes talking about this, and you're hearing literally the world's richest man talking about how ESGs are used to control corporate America. Very worth listening to.
We should put that in the show notes. Yeah, because I would like to check that out as well.
It was last week. It was very good.
Before we get out of here, and I know we're getting close to the end of our time, I want to end on a bright spot, perhaps a revolutionary human achievement that has just come about. It's actually, I think it was first published before we recorded last week, but we're getting to it now. LK99,
Not that guy.
No. Get that sorry disgrace for a ginger off the screen.
We'll do a monologue on.
I tried to see where you were going, and I tried to predict it.
You were trying to skate where the puck was going, but the puck went the other direction.
Bring up under medium under quantum locking. We'll get to that.
So there's this new material that's been invented by, is it Korean?
South Korean.
South Korean scientists. It's a superconductor, and these things have existed for a long time, but typically they take extreme environments to work, right? It's like extreme pressure, extremely cold temperature. And so the interesting thing about this one is that it operates at room temperature and ambient pressure, making it extremely applicable to a lot of different applications that could dramatically change humanity for the better.
So the important difference here, we're going to show what quantum locking is because it demonstrates what's valuable about this. Now, normally it's at extreme temperatures, like you said, very, very cold. Kyle, go ahead and play it forward just on mute here, and I'll narrate it through because it's the audio's rolled rough. So this is quantum locking, right? Basically what it says is that the relationship between the atoms of this are fixed.
Whoa. And
they hover at a very specific, they also can move with momentum, right? If you propel it forward over a track that's made of the same thing, it moves with like zero resistance.
So for those of you just listening, we've got a set of magnets and then a material over the top, and you would expect with magnetic levitation that we currently have, it can sit parallel, but this person is able to apply pressure to it and manipulate it so that it hovers in whatever position he manipulates it to.
Additionally to that, it requires the energy input of keeping it very cold, which is very expensive using this typically. And then EV mag, it requires a lot of energy to propel the thing, but this requires zero energy. Look how it goes. So it's just the momentum of his finger flip. There's no energy moving that thing forward after it's pushed because all it has is wind resistance. Right, so it takes far less energy to create and maintain the quantum lock. Additionally, that the mag lift has a propel away, while this has a lock between the atoms from the bottom to the top. Does that make sense?
Incredible.
Yeah.
So it doesn't want to slide off the track. I mean, we're watching this little puck. It looks like a little stone puck travel around a circular track here, and it doesn't want to fly off the edge of the track. There's nothing holding it to this thing. It's just going in a perfect circle. We'll link to this video in the show notes so you can check it out. It's fascinating. He just tipped it on its side, and now the thing is totally locked, traveling at an angle around this circle. It's
they also do it
insane.
upside down. Yeah, you can watch it do it upside down.
Oh, what? Okay, so
Isn't that wild?
now the little puck is underneath the plate instead of sitting on top. It's hovering below, within a centimeter of this disc, and still just suspended.
So one of my questions is how much weight can it bear without the since the locking is itself quantum? I wonder how that works. But the important thing to understand about LK99 is that unlike needing the energy expenditure to keep the device very, very cool, it can operate at room temperatures. So what that means is you have perfect conduction between these things at room temperature. So you don't need energy in order to transfer the energy out. Right. What it means is that the amount of energy in stays preserved. So I'll give you a couple examples of why this is so important. Imagine a train that permanently levitates with zero energy expenditure, as long as it's made out of the right things and you put the right things in the right distance relationship to each other. He's now levitating bread.
Now we're looking at bread flying around in a circle.
This is why you gotta watch this on YouTube, because you can watch us react to flying bread. Or Spotify. So the next one is imagine power moving across long distances with zero energy loss. One of the problems of the power grid is, so you have like a power producer in Colstrip, Montana, that moves energy all the way to the West Coast in Oregon. Over that distance, there's a resistance that happens that causes energy loss. I wish Evan was here because he could explain a lot more elegantly. But effectively, the electrons, they kind of bump into each other and they don't move out like perfectly across the distances. As they bump into each other, they careen into the various different insulation, things like that, and they actually are dissipated in the process. So you lose power over it as heat.
Yes.
This would mean if you use this, according to the theory of it, you could have perfect transfer of energy over long distances because the electrons are perfectly conducted, superconduction, right? They would literally sit in a perfect line.
Incredible.
Imagine storing energy in a superconductor loop forever, right? Because you could store energy in and there would be zero energy loss out. So even in the best batteries that we have currently, as you store energy in, there's a loss in the bioelectrical exchange, right? Between chemical electrical exchange.
Like lithium batteries will lose like 1% a month or something like that.
Right. So imagine this would mean perfect storage permanently forever, ever. And then quantum. This is really important for controlling nuclear fusion, far cheaper and longer. So right now, nuclear fusion requires a ton of energy input. This would drastically, in order to like create the magnetic fields, in order to control the fusion reactor. Still theoretical. We don't have. We have some early signs. There was some reporting from a couple of months ago about a fusion reactor that was actually putting out more energy than it was taking in. Mm-hmm. But this would drastically improve that, because rather than having active energy input to control the magnetic fields, you would just have this material used to protect and create the magnetic fields. And then lastly, important for second stage quantum computing, meaning taking quantum computing from the kind of existing where it's just like zero user interface and no, like you can't really use a quantum computer as a personal computer, to that next place of personal computing, because of how much more efficient it is at the delivery of and movement of electrical signals. So really crazy, so cool. Lots of amazing technical possibilities with it. If true, we don't know that yet. Hasn't been replicated.
Well, it's very new, and so there's a lot of development left to be done on it. But I think it's indicative of something that we talk about a lot on this podcast. The people that don't believe in humanity, that don't believe in people, that feel like there's too many of us on the planet or whatever, are just wrong. Because what if this person, this team that created this cool technology that could literally revolutionize humanity, was never born, or was, somehow terribly removed from the planet because of some sort of anti-human agenda? That would be freaking awful. Think about the potential that this holds for people. Like, this could be incredible. This could change so many things. Think about, just what you talked about, nuclear energy, making it safer, more efficient. We're talking about scale of things that is probably not even comprehensible at this point.
It also makes so clear why, bigotry is stupid, right? And just so dumb. No one cares that these guys were Korean. No one cares. What matters is that they discovered something potentially amazing, and they published it openly for anyone to duplicate. and people are trying to duplicate it now.
Awesome.
Right? So like that is what science should be. That is what a liberal order in the classical sense should be, where we don't care the color of your skin. We care about what you contribute to the larger social order to make the world a better place. And this might be one of those opportunities to do so.
Well, this is another reason why I love where like the open source movement when it comes to coding is just because anybody can put stuff out online and anybody can critique it. Anybody can take it, enhance it. Everybody kind of knows what's going on. It's not closed behind locked doors. It's just kind of an open movement of people just building things and pushing humanity forward with our technology, right?
Well, it raises a conversation that we should have on a subsequent episode about intellectual property and all that stuff, because that's a really interesting subject, at least to me, but I'm a bit of a nerd. And
yeah, we can get into it.
Yeah, we should. Well, I guess on behalf of myself and these other two nerds, we're going to get out of here. Thank you so much for listening. Please do, wherever you're listening to this, offer us a review on Spotify or your podcast platform of choice. Drop us a comment if you have a question, if there's something particularly you liked or you want us to cover on a future episode. Like it, subscribe to the channel, share with your friends, and we will see you next time. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Liberty Portal podcast. To help us fight internet censorship, we really appreciate it if you like, comment, subscribe, follow, hit the notification bell, do whatever it is that you do wherever it is that you're listening to this podcast. To find us on social media and everywhere around the web, visit us at linktree.com/libertyportalpod.